Necromancers are the tank destroyers in Guild Wars 2 PvP. They have a lot of sustain to shrug off damage, but also have great sustained damage, boon removal, and lifesteal to bypass many defenses. While Necromancers have ranged damage, it can be slow and predictable. Playing around a Necromancer is often about knowing when to leave because they can't finish kills as well as every other DPS class. They have the pressure and sustain to get you out of cooldowns for their team though. Another disadvantage they have in being slow is that their animations are very easy to interrupt, and CC is very strong against them. The core mechanic of Necromancers is Life Force and Shroud. Whenever any character dies in range of a Necromancer, they will gain Life Force, making Necromancer very strong in places where kills are quick and easy, like World vs. World and PvE. In PvP, they rely more on their build to generate Life Force, and using this Life Force, they can enter into Death Shroud, using this second life bar to have extra survivability. While in Death Shroud, they will slowly lose Life Force, and all damage they receive will be transferred to their Life Force instead of their health. They also gain access to a new skill bar of 5 skills depending on their specialization. While in Shroud, they cannot use any of their utility skills, weapon skills, or heal skill, so playing around a Necromancer in Shroud can be simplified to playing around 5 skills. Core Necromancers have Life Blast, which is a piercing projectile that can hit from very long range. Then there is Dark Path. This is a slow-moving, unblockable projectile that will chill, bleed, and allow the Necromancer to port to the first target it hits for 3 seconds after it lands. If you're trying to escape from a Necromancer that landed Dark Path on you, try to save your mobility skills for after they port, or after 3 seconds till the port runs out. Doom will fear their target from range for 3 seconds. When you see the Reaper above their head, you want to immediately dodge, but it's very quick, so predicting when they will use it is important. Doom is usually used once per Shroud entrance, so they might be a bit trigger happy and use it early on. After someone dodges is usually when I like to use it. Fear can be removed by Condition Cleanse and by Stun Breaks, and since Doom is their longest spear and CC, you'll want to save your Stun Break for this in case you can't avoid it. Life Transfer is just a wide range AoE that gives them Life Force the more targets they hit with it, helping them to stay in Shroud longer. This is their longest animation in Shroud, so if there's anything you want to interrupt, it's this because it will help them to stay in Shroud longer. Finally, there is Tainted Shackles, which will tether nearby enemies to the Necromancer and pulse Torment on them. The final pulse will do an Immobilize after 4 seconds, so you'll want to dodge that, but if you were tethered long enough to need to dodge the Immobilize, you'll want to be cleansing the very long duration of 8 stacks of Torment. This is where most of their damage comes from in Shroud, so you really want to get out of range of them to break that tether immediately. Or stand still and cleanse the Torment after the final pulse comes out, because Torment deals more damage to targets who are moving. Tainted Shackles will also reveal all enemies that it hits on the initial pulse, so it's really good versus thieves and other stealth classes because you can reveal them if you have a general idea of where they are. Shroud has a 10-second cooldown once they leave it before they can re-enter, and during this 10 seconds they are very vulnerable to focus. So after they leave Shroud is when you want to use most of your interrupts because they have access to their heal skill and utilities again. Most Necromancers will either heal right after leaving Shroud or right before entering Shroud, so interrupting their heal can be very devastating to a Necromancer because their most important heal, Consume Conditions, will cleanse all conditions and heal them the more they cleanse. So generally if you're interrupting this heal, you'll be pressuring them really hard because they'll be tanking all those conditions for a while longer while it's on the 4-second interrupt cooldown. Also, you'll make their Shroud rotation really awkward. So for example, a Necromancer wants to cleanse all their conditions and then go into Shroud, but if you erupt their heal, they will have to wait 4 seconds to go into Shroud once they recast their heal, or they'll just go into Shroud without having used their heal. Since they can't use their heal skill while in Shroud, they'll have to wait until the next time they leave Shroud, and their heal skill recharges while they are in Shroud. So generally a Necromancer wants it to be on cooldown when they're in Shroud so they can get value off of using their heal skill as often as possible. In other words, you ruin a lot of their synergy and sustain with a simple interrupt if it is timed well. You also know that because their Shroud regenerates faster than their health, that you want to not spend too much of your damage into it. Their Shroud will deplete itself over time anyways, so you want to save a lot of your pressure for when they leave Shroud rather than when they're in it, and instead you want to be kiting or playing a little bit more passively when they're in Shroud. There is also the Reaper specialization, which has a more melee oriented set of skills in Shroud. Their auto attack hits really hard, so you don't want to be in melee range of them unless you have some weakness or CC to trade damage with them. Death's Charge is a pretty slow leap that does lots of small attacks, and then a strong final attack that blinds at the end. It will also block any projectiles directed at them during the leap animation. This is what gives Reapers a lot of their mobility to chase and disengage because it's such a low cooldown. You want to avoid the final part of the leap by moving in unpredictable ways or waiting to dodge away. Because it is such a slow ability, the way that the skill paths on moving targets may not be reliable. This is important because once they get close to you, even if the Death Charge doesn't land, you'll want to be dodging anyways because they have other abilities to lock you down, and wasting a dodge on their Death Charge isn't ideal. Infusing Terror gives them 3 stability stacks and damage reduction, and they can AoE Fear shortly afterwards, and since Reapers chill on Fear, you can be locked down soon after. So when you see the stability, you know that you probably want to dodge soon because you want to avoid that fear, and you want to either boon rip them and then CC them, or wait until the stability runs out to CC them, because while a Necromancer is in Reaper Shroud, they lose or deplete their Shroud faster. So you want to waste their time while they're in Shroud by getting out of range of them and making it difficult for them to basically just pump out their damage. Soul Spiral is a heavy power and condition attack, giving out lots of poison around them and making them very mobile while dealing damage. Finally, there is Executioner's Sight. This is a very telegraphed attack, which will stun one target for 2.5 seconds and then leave down a chilling field. If you don't have a dodge for this, you'll take tons of chill and eat all of their high damaging auto attacks afterwards. Remember when I said Necros use Life Force to go into Shroud? Well, Scourge is different. They use their Life Force to give them barrier, so they are never technically in Shroud, which means fighting them is less binary about playing around Shroud and then not in Shroud, but playing around both at the same time. Instead, they will use shade skills. They will place a shade on the ground and their shade skills will affect the area around their shade and them, giving support to allies and damage to enemies. You still don't want to attack a Necromancer while they have a lot of barrier because that will fade away in a few seconds, and you can save your damage for afterwards. Their shade skills have no cast time, so they can be used while stunned, and you will see a huge red circle when they are using shade skills, so you know when they may be doing something. There is little distinction between their shade skills, but they can give barrier, convert conditions into boons, and fear enemies with their shade skills. Generally, they will use the fear as soon as you jump on top of them, so using an evade shortly afterwards will avoid that. Harbinger Shroud is a potential trait that they can take which will corrupt boons on any enemies inside the area of the circle when it finishes filling. This will change the Scourge's Desert Shroud ability into this attack. Their 2 big barrier skills are their heal skill and Desert Shroud, which you can notice during these animations. You'll also notice a load of barrier, so it's a good idea not to trade with them when they have this much barrier. Even though Scourges may have barrier, it is weaker than Shroud at surviving focus fire because it is not as instantaneous or it is not as bulky. However, the barrier gives them much more sustain over time. This means that Scourges are easier to kill when they're focused, but core Necromancers or Reapers are easier to poke down and out-sustain. Necromancers also gain life force when they fear opponents, and that's why it's really important for you to avoid the doom or any other kind of fear. So going over the weapon skills now. Every Necromancer weapon either has some form of boon removal, boon corruption, or life force generation. Staff may not be the best weapon for Necromancers, but it is the most versatile, and that makes it a very good secondary weapon set for pretty much every Necromancer build. The staff trait is called Soul Marks, which will give them life force and unblockable marks. So because marks are so versatile, you can pretty much use them from any direction. And because marks are so wide range, because they're 1200 range and then there's like a radius on top of that, so they're more like 1300 range, they are one of the easiest skills to land and hardest skills to play around because you can't really tell which mark is being used. There is the Mark of Blood, which will give bleeding, and then there is Chillblains, which will give chill and poison. This is a very strong mark because it helps them to catch up because of the chill. And then there's Putrid Mark, which is like a power skill with a transfer of conditions. You can't really know which one is which other than seeing the symbols on the ground, so if any role players out there got time to read marks in the middle of combat. But there is the Reaper's Mark, which will have a very obvious lifting of the arm animation, and that fears, so avoid the fear by watching the animation. The Axe, this is a power weapon. The auto attack just puts on vulnerability, but Ghastly Claws is where the big damage comes from. So when they lift their arms like this, they'll do a heavy attack which hits a lot of times, and it doesn't have any sort of animation other than lifting the arms. Will give them life force as well as do a lot of damage. So Ghastly Claws is the most important thing for you to avoid because it will do a lot of damage and it will give them sustain. Unholy Feast is just a very wide AoE boon corruption and will cripple. The focus weapon set has the Soul Grasp, which is a little bit of a lifesteal and will give them some life force. Then there's Spinal Shivers. So this is a triple boon corruption and will chill for 5 seconds and do a lot of damage depending on how many boons it removes. So when you see their hand get raised like that, it's going to be hard for you to see that hand movement, but yeah, if you do see it, then you want to dodge this for sure. The Scepter weapon set has a more of a condition playstyle and will deal bleeding and poison on the auto attack. The Grasping Dead skill will do a long duration bleeding, which you can't really see. And then there's Feast of Corruption, which will give them torment for each condition on you and will give them life force as well. So the more conditions you have on you when this occurs, the more damage it will do and the more sustain it will give them. So you either want to avoid Feast of Corruption, which doesn't really have a very obvious animation, or you want to be cleansing your conditions to make sure it doesn't really happen. Dagger 4 is a Deathly Swarm, which will send out a swarm of locusts, and it will blind and transfer conditions to the target. So you want to not have this hit you if you're putting conditions on them, because it's like an Uno reverse card pretty much. And this is a projectile, so it can be reflected, which means if you reflect their Deathly Swarm, it will transfer the conditions to the Necromancers. So it can be a very hard reverse to the reverse. Then there's Enfeebling Blood. This is a corruption, and you'll see it come out of the sky like this, and it will do a lot of weakness, bleeding, and corrupt 1 boon. The Dagger main hand gives life force on the auto attack and will life siphon. It also has the Dark Pact, which will immobilize and corrupt boons into conditions. So when you see their arms go above their head like this, you want to dodge that because that's the immobilize. The Warhorn is also a very strong ability because it has a 2-second unblockable daze, and that's a really long CC for a AoE. They also have Locust Swarm, so when you see Locust Swarm on their bar, if you stand next to them, you'll be giving them a lot of healing and sustain because it gives life siphoning and it gives life force for each enemy it hits. So there's two main trait lines that give Necromancers their survivability. One is Death Magic, the other is Blood Magic. You can tell a Necromancer is Blood Magic because when they are in combat, they will have the Vampiric Aura, and that just basically means that they'll be gaining health and doing a little bit extra damage every time they hit from the Lifesteal Aura that they give to themselves and their allies. Usually a Blood Magic Necro will also take Unholy Martyr, which means that whenever they leave Shroud, they will cleanse 3 conditions, which means you don't want to be putting conditions on them while they're in Shroud. Now obviously if you put them on them right as they enter Shroud, they'll tick their life force down a little bit, but after a while you really want to stop putting conditions on them because they're just going to consume them, which is going to give them more life force, and they're just going to get cleansed anyways. So as soon as they leave their Shroud, that's when their condition cleanse is gated by a 10-second cooldown, and your condies will last. Death Magic has a little bit of toughness added with the Carapace mechanic. You can tell that a Necromancer is a Death Magic Necromancer if they have the Carapace buff on their bar like this. And if they're a Minion Master, they'll generally be Death Magic. So a Minion Master, how you play around them is the AI will always try to go towards you. So you run away from the Necromancer, and then as soon as the AI comes towards you, you can go and attack the Necromancer. You never want to trade with them while their minions are on top of them because you'll lose almost every time. If they're not a Minion Master Necro and they're using Death Magic, then they're probably taking the Shrouded Removal trait, which means they're also removing conditions while in Shroud. So basically they have a lot of condition cleanse from their Shroud if they're Blood Magic or Death Magic. You also want to watch out for the Curses trait line. You can tell that a Necromancer is running Curses by a few things. So first of all, they have the option to run Plague Sending, which when they enter Shroud will have a buff on their bar, which means the next attack that they do while in Shroud will transfer 2 conditions from them to the first person that they hit. And this can be dangerous because if they're also Blood Magic, then they can suck up all the conditions from their allies and then transfer them to the enemies. So pretty much as soon as a Necromancer goes in Shroud, if they're Curses, you want to disengage for a little bit. And that's also true because of Weakening Shroud, which will weaken foes when you crit, and it will also create an Enfeebling Blood, which is basically the Dagger 5 skill whenever they enter Shroud. So they'll do the Weakening Shroud on top of themselves when they enter Shroud, and then they'll also have Plague Sending. So as soon as a Curses Necro goes into Shroud, you want to avoid their next attack, or basically just dodge immediately so that you avoid their Plague Sending and their Weakening Shroud. Curses Necros can also have Terror, which means that their fears will deal damage, but oftentimes that means that your stun breaks can heal you, because if you stun break a fear, then you don't take the damage. They also have Path of Corruption, which means their Shroud 2 skills will convert 2 boons into conditions. So it is one of the heaviest boon conversion traits in the game because it's so spammable. As for their utility skills, some Necromancers take wells. All of them pretty much you don't want to stand in ever, so just don't stand in anything that looks like a well like this, because they are just really bad news for you. Especially the Chill Well, because that will blind and chill you. So yeah, don't stand in the Well of Darkness. There are the Spectral skills like Spectral Armor and Walk. Whenever you see these on their bar, you don't want to hit them as much, So Spectral Armor will give them a lot of life force when they have it active. So usually you're doing less damage than you're giving them in sustain from the life force, because it gives 8% of their life force every second that they get hit. So they have protection as well. So generally only put condies on them, or don't hit them with attacks that do a lot of hits over time. Spectral Walk is the same thing, but more for condition removal, and it will remove 2 condies every 2 seconds and will eat those up and give them life force. So you really don't want to put conditions on Necromancers when you see Spectral Walk is active. And also it will leave a trail, and during the duration of Spectral Walk they can return back to the original location. So there's a lot of plays that you can do with Spectral Walk and porting around and juking. So most Necromancers will be taking this, and knowing how to play around Spectral Walk is important. So if you do see that they use Spectral Walk, you want to either have one person stay at the original location and another person chase, so you can have one person camp their original Spectral Walk location and have others chase them, and that way they can't escape. Or you can just keep chasing them, and if they take it back, then that's pretty much the best you can do, and then you'll get juked. Generally though, if they're doing something like using Spectral Walk and then jumping off a ledge, you don't want to jump off with them, because then they can get back up on the ledge. So you want to sit up on the ledge with them and wait until the Spectral Walk ends, and then you can jump down, because then you have a lot more choice in how you can chase them. Whereas if you jump off the ledge and they go back up, then you got to go all the way around. So Spectral Ring, which will fear anyone who passes through the ring, and it is unblockable. So if you're inside a Spectral Ring, you want to immediately stun break or Condi cleanse as you're trying to get out, or if you don't have a cleanse, then you want to just try to survive inside that ring. Summon Fleshworm will create a minion at a location, and it will be immobilized there, and they can at any time use it again to teleport to the minion, and if they're out of range of the minion, they'll just port towards it. This is a really strong skill because it basically gives Necros an out to any situation. So if they precast their Fleshworm, say at like their own spawn, no one can kill that Fleshworm, because one way to counter it is to kill the Fleshworm so they can't port to it. But they can put it in a lot of places that it's either impossible to get to, or it's just inconvenient to go out there and do that. It's just probably more effective to just go for the Necro and force them to use the port. Corrosive Poison Cloud is a really good projectile blocking field. It's very hard to see it, but it's this very subtle poison AoE on the floor, and you don't want to stand in either because it'll weaken and poison. So it's a really good counter to projectiles and power classes. There's also Spectral Grasp, which will pull in multiple enemies and give them lots of life force. So getting hit by Spectral Grasp is really bad. Signet of Spite is mostly a power utility, but if they do use it as a condition build, it can do a lot of conditions such as poison, torment, and bleeding, as well as some other debilitating conditions. So if you see this animation of the Signet of Spite, you want to immediately dodge, because then you'll get a ton of conditions on you and it's not going to feel good. Plague Signet is an important utility to watch out for. You can see that they have the passive effect on their bar, and the passive effect will transfer conditions from their allies to them. Then when they activate the Signet, it will transfer 5 conditions from the Necromancer to their target. So if you're loading up conditions on a Necromancer and you see that they have Plague Signet up, you want to immediately dodge or block or something to avoid getting Plague Signeted and having all those conditions on you. And it's an instant cast, so it's kind of hard to react to it, but a little bit of prediction and you can do it. Then there's Signet of Undeath. You want to watch out for this because this can revive their allies. So if you see a Necromancer is running Signet of Undeath, you want to, when you get one of their allies down, you want to interrupt their Signet of Undeath, and if you interrupt them, it will still cost them the 9,000 or so health that it costs to use the skill, but then they won't get the effect, so they'll basically just lose 9,000 health. The elite skills that Necromancers have are Lich Form, which gives them a lot of precision, so even on a condition build they can be critting in Lich Form, and they will basically be able to do these massive projectile attacks, and they can also do a Wave of Fear and siphon life from nearby foes. So while they're in Lich Form, you want to be either using Projectile Reflect or line of sighting them. They do pulse stability while in Lich Form. The Fear Wave that they use is unblockable, so you definitely want to dodge that, and it's kind of a clunky skill to use, so if you just run in circles around a Necromancer, it's going to be hard for them to land the Fear, but they can still be attacking you from either direction, so you want to be safe when you're playing around a Lich Form. Plague Lands is another elite skill that is pretty high impact. If you don't see it, it's a very kind of subtle animation. You'll see this like pulsing on the ground. Every tick that occurs is stronger than the last one. So if you get hit by the final tick, that is really bad. But you can stay in it at first for a little bit, but as time goes on, you definitely want to get out of that Plague Lands and make sure you don't go in early. Reapers can use Chilled to the Bone, which is a very wide AoE that will stun and give them stability. And it's a 3-second stun. So it is very dangerous if you do get hit by it and don't have a stun break. Usually it's better to blind a Chill to the Bone because then your allies don't have to dodge it as well. Scourge Elite is Ghastly Breach, which is like a shorter term Plague Lands, and it will, instead of giving a lot of Condi spread, it will just give the really high effect conditions like slow and burning, and then it will also convert boons into conditions, and the boon conversion will go into torment. So it does a lot of damage in a small window of time. Necromancers counter warriors because they have the damage to break through the warriors' defenses, while also being able to kite them and corrupt their might into weakness. Necros also love going against boon heavy classes that they can corrupt, like engineers. Because engineers don't handle burst conditions well, they have more gradual cleanses, and they lack stun breaks, so they pretty much get demolished by Necromancers. Elementalists hate going against Necromancers because of how much chill that Necros give out, which is a direct counter to the Elementalist class mechanic. Guardians and Revenants are also very boon heavy, which makes Necromancers one of the best classes for killing them. However, Guardians convert conditions into boons just like Necromancers corrupt boons. Revenants have the mobility to take advantage of Necromancers in between their Shroud cooldowns, so these two are situational matchups. If a thief catches a Necromancer out of position, it can really secure the kill quickly with interrupts to their heals with their stolen ability, which can fear, and burst damage when they leave the Shroud. But Necromancers, especially core ones, which can reveal thieves, can dish out tons of AoE damage that can catch thieves in stealth. Mesmers counter Necromancers because of their quick and very disruptive nature. A Mesmer can get in and do its damage before a Necromancer can react, and if they do react, they'll just get dazed. Rangers are very survivable, just like Necromancers, but Necromancers get their survivability from Shroud and hitting their opponent to fuel them, while Rangers are more slippery and can use their pets to bait out Shroud and then go in for CC and Burst when Necromancers are out of Shroud. Necromancers also really hate Longbow Rangers because they don't have the mobility to catch them. So when dealing with a Necromancer, you really want to avoid just trading damage with them because they get life force back, and you don't want to be fighting them when they're in Shroud because that's such a renewable resource. So you want to avoid their attacks that generate life force, and you want to kite them when they're in Shroud, and then you want to switch to a very aggressive stance and go for the kill once they have left Shroud because there's that 10-second window where they're pretty vulnerable. Interrupt their heal, make it awkward for their rotations, and that's pretty much how you fight a Necromancer. So If you like this kind of video, give it a like and subscribe, and check out the matchups in the description below for all the other classes. And I will see you guys next time.